Hello and welcome to Lean In Leander. I'm your host, Andrew Naudine, and this is episode 10. 10 episodes into the Lean In Leander podcast, and I can't say that I'm any more excited about this one than I was the first one. No, just kidding. I'm super excited that this is the 10th episode. I really kind of can't believe the fact that we've recorded 10 of these so far. Have no idea when I started in January where this would take us. To be frank, still have no idea where this is going. But I do know that so far, people seem to like what it is that I'm doing here with the podcast. So for those of you who have been reaching out to me and encouraging me, I appreciate that. And all of those of you who have subscribed early or liked the Facebook page or been listening to the podcast, thank you so much for taking a few minutes out of your day to listen to what I have to say and the people that I'm talking to. So with that, this is, of course, as I mentioned, episode 10. It's also the second in the Lean In Leander Vote in Leander series. And with that, I'm also promoting voter registration. So you can go to voteinleander.com right now, and you can check to see whether you've already been registered to vote, or if you need to register to vote, you can actually register to vote on that website. We plan to do a few other things in the community, some voter registration drives, some election information drives. So if you have the propensity to support those types of efforts, I definitely appreciate any donations that you can make to the cause. Every single penny will go to that initiative. I'm not putting that money anywhere else except in materials and information in the community to help people understand where they can vote, when they can vote, and all the information therein. So if you are, again, so inclined, please support voteinleander.com. There's a donation opportunity on the website itself. And we're doing a few other things on Facebook. If you are one of the Facebook people that watch the show, you may have seen the Vote in Leander t-shirts and merchandise that I've put up. So again, all that money goes directly to the Vote in Leander efforts. We're just trying to fund it. So we have an opportunity to get signage out there, door hangers, and voter registration drives, things of that nature. I have until April 1st to get people registered. So I encourage you, if you're so inclined, any donation would be appreciated. On that note, if you haven't registered, register. Voteinleander.com makes it very, very easy. And again, the main reason that I'm doing this is because when I look at the data behind the elections over the past few years, I've only been here 3, but I go back a little bit further than that. The most recent average is 3.5% of the population. And I'll let you do the math. 3.5% of, let's just say 65,000, because that's about where we're at right now. We'll probably be closing on 70 very soon. That's just not a very good number, folks. And so what we need to do is we need to participate in our local elections. So take time to understand who the candidates are, take time to understand what their positions are, and vote the way that you want to vote. Again, this is a nonpartisan election, so we encourage everybody to vote for the candidate that they feel would be best fit in guiding the city going forward. Remember, these are volunteer positions, folks. Members of the city council, the mayor, none of these people get paid for their time. It's something that they do out of the goodness of their own heart, I would think. But you have to be careful about how you select the goodness. So take your time, learn who the candidates are, vote your conscience, and we'll be all the better for your participation. So enough about that. Actually, it's never enough about that. I'm always going to come back to that topic because it's really, really important to me. And I think it's really, really important to you to have a voice in your local elections. So participate, folks. Don't be on the sidelines. All right? Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and move ahead with episode 10 and the second in the Vote in Leander series. I speak with Steve Haynes today, who is a candidate for place 4 on the city council. Steve and I had an opportunity to sit down, chat a little about who he is, where he's from, and a few things that he's done. I found it to be very insightful. Steve is a very personable guy, and I think you'll see that as well. So I encourage you, if you're watching the podcast on one of the video outlets, grab yourself a drink for another 30, 40 minutes or so. If you're listening to the podcast, turn it up a notch, and we will sit down, as I mentioned, with Steve Haynes and get a little bit of insight into him and why he's running for city council here in Leander, Texas. So enjoy. I hope you like this episode.
So we're here at Gaetano's with Steve Haynes. Steve is running for place 4, right? Place 4 with the Leander election coming up here in May. And since we're outside, it's a beautiful day. We're just going to go ahead and remove the masks. Remember, mask up, folks. Stay safe. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to chat with you a little bit.
Well, I appreciate the time.
Oh, fantastic. This is the first time Steve and I have ever met. So no preconceived notions anywhere on this conversation. But I've read a lot on your bio and whatnot, and I know that you have a pretty interesting background. So what I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time talking about who you are.
Okay.
Okay. So I know, because I did a little bit of sleuthing on you, you're from Jeffersonville, Ohio.
That's right.
Okay. So whereabouts exactly is Jeffersonville?
Jeffersonville's about midway between Columbus and Cincinnati, right on I-71.
Okay.
Growing up, it was about an hour from the nearest movie theater.
Gotcha. My wife grew up in Portsmouth, Ohio.
That's very near.
Okay.
Very
I
near.
thought you might be in the same area.
Yes.
It was funny because I mentioned it the other day when we were chatting, and she said, "There's a lot of people from Ohio down here," and I said, "Yeah,
There's a reason.
Is. Yeah, no, I'm sure.
We'll start with weather and go from there.
Right. When we lived in Houston, she graduated Ohio State, and when we were in Houston, go Buckeyes. The largest. The largest fan club outside of Ohio, outside of the state of Ohio, is actually the largest Ohio State fan club, I should say.
Right.
Is actually in Houston, Texas.
I don't doubt that. I ran into a lot of people there that are Buckeye fans.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm sure. Which actually kind of leads me, I'm glad you said that, because I think we also share a little bit of, we'll call it familiarity, if you will, because I read in your bio that you worked with the YMCA, I think it was, in Northwest Houston.
Right.
So whereabouts did you live in Northwest Houston?
Gosh, I spent almost 30 years in that area. When I first moved to Houston, I lived down in the Bear Creek area.
Okay.
After that, I moved to Spring, and then the Cutton Road area, and then ultimately the 1960 45 area.
Okay, all right. Similar. Moved to Houston. Actually, I lived closer to the Astro Domain when I first got there, but I was a single guy, so it was different. But once we started our family, we were up in the Cypress area.
Yep.
I think I'm familiar with the same YMCA.
Right.
My son actually started playing soccer there back in the day.
Yeah.
It's the one there off of, what is that? It's not 290.
Well, there's one at 249 in like Cypresswood.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not the one that I was.
Okay, so you were at the other one.
The one on further up off of Ella.
Gotcha. Okay, that's what I was curious about, because I was like, that would be weird. But anyway, so you did a lot of the same things that I did. I mean, I kind of stuck specifically with soccer, but it sounds like you did a lot of volunteer work there.
Right. A lot of coaching, a lot of umpiring. Run some tournaments.
Okay. Yep. Tournaments we do share as well.
Oh, perfect.
I've run a soccer tournament in the city of Houston for about 17 years now.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Where?
It's the Dynamo's Puma Cup. It's actually in Cypress.
Oh, wow.
It used to be a Valentine's tournament.
I would venture to guess I probably have friends that their kids played in that.
More than likely. Yeah. More than likely. If you're in that general area, more than likely. If they play for obviously the Dynamos, or if they played for the Texans back in the day, or who else is up there? Rise, I think, is up there now. They've all changed their names so many times.
That's become a big business.
Oh my gosh, yes. No, it's interesting. It is an interesting business. Sports marketing and youth sports marketing and stuff like that. There's some money there.
Yeah, on that topic, just looking at what Leander Little League has done the last few years, and especially this year with their marketing, their new logo, the uniforms, all of the online purchases that families can make of the jackets, the T-shirts. really come a long way.
Now, you're pretty involved with Leander Little League, right?
Yeah, not as much now because my son's not playing this year.
Okay.
But yeah, the last handful of years coaching and umpiring, and I'm still umpiring this year.
Okay. Were you involved with any of the conversations regarding that rebranding and the marketing and stuff like
not.
that? You weren't?
No, I was not. I believe I was one of the early people that got to see those, but I was not part of the conversations.
Okay, all right. It's always interesting to see that because, again, you know, my experience with that was something that is very communal, very community-oriented. Lots of times those volunteer leagues generally are that way, especially when you get down to the club level. You're talking about, you know, a handful of parents, you know, 10 or so that are actively involved on a regular basis, which can kind of be a little bit of a challenge at the end of the day. Volunteers are always a challenge to get.
Oh, yeah. I'm not going to say it's the 80-20 rule, but there are definitely some parents out there doing above and beyond their share in multiple teams. And
no, for sure. You see it all
entire
the time.
Weekend out there at the park.
Yep. No, and kudos to them. I mean, I think it's a great way to support your community. If that's something that you find rewarding, you know, definitely. But it's always interesting just on the topic because once you get into the marketing and the branding and stuff like that, you start bringing in a different world into that little, you know, because it's a little fiefdom almost, you know, it's like our little kingdom, you know. And so it's always interesting to see how people react to that. And apparently from what you're saying, I'm not super familiar with the Leander Little League. Other than tertiary, and I did see some of that stuff, so that's interesting. I didn't realize it was a rebrand, but that's kind of cool. But it's interesting to watch that happen, and I've been involved in it before, you know. So it's always like it's you know it's a haul. Yeah, getting people to think about it I want to say the right way. Yeah, but you know, just it's a business, and you kind of have to bring that in at some point.
It is a business, but you know, youth sports in general, it's. I guess I'm going to use the word frustrating sometimes, in that there's always a small minority of the parents that think their kid is going to be the next Jeff Bagwell, and
or Lionel Messi.
He's not.
Yeah, they're rare. They're rare. Yeah. They're
one
rare.
in tens of thousands.
Yeah,
but. You got to be out there for the kids.
It's
the worst thing I've seen, and it wasn't here. And in fact, it was one of my early seasons coaching back in Houston. Kids just hating the sport because of the pressure the parents were putting on them. So I started doing a parents meeting before we ever had a practice every season. Just you've got to set the expectations. This is for fun. We want the kids to learn the fundamentals. We want them to get out here and get away from their screens.
No, been there, done that. They did exactly the same thing. You know, we always emphasize teamwork. And you know, not individualism within that framework. You know, what I used to do, I mean, obviously I did the same thing with the parents, but I used to bring the boys aside and just say, you know, hey, what are your goals here? What is it that you want to do? Because you want to encourage the dream, you know, you want them to continue to strive. And my experience was they figure it out on their own. Yeah. They figure it out at a point that, you know, hey, I'm not going to be Jeff Bagwell. You know, maybe I'm good enough to play a few years in college, that kind of thing. You know, and they come to their own conclusions.
And there's always adult softball league that everybody likes.
Sure, yeah, yeah. I've been involved with a few. So. Anyway, okay, so a little bit more about you, and this is something that I found interesting, only because I'm familiar with it, and I don't want to assume that a lot of people who might be watching or listening would be familiar with it. And I don't want to go into you don't have to do a deep dive here, Steve. Okay. But I was in Houston, I was working in the hospitality industry, and I had some exposure to the Promise Keepers. So I'm familiar with it. I know what it did and what that whole process was. And it was, from a business perspective, it was a very good event in the city of Houston. It brought in a lot of hotel revenue. I want you to talk a little bit about Promise Keepers, you know, what you did with that group and what it meant to you.
Sure. Well, I became exposed to Promise Keepers in the mid-'90s, just through a men's group at church. And then they had a number of conferences in Houston. I ended up volunteering and ended up on the leadership team for 3 of those conferences. A long time ago. I'm thinking 98, 99, and 01. So I was the official title was the usher captain, which was essentially the volunteer coordinator. So I and my small team were responsible for recruiting 400 plus volunteers, putting together the volunteer plan for everything they did. Part of it was taking the offering, which is quite a task in the Astrodome. And you
Yeah.
mentioned that it's a big business. Promise Keepers is probably the most organized group I've ever worked with. It's like working on a live TV set.
Yeah.
There's a script down to the minute for the whole weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So we had an 11-minute window to take the offering in the entire Astrodome.
Wow.
Which,
that's an undertaking.
Quite a bit of planning, quite a bit of hand drawing maps and things to make that happen. And then also just working with my usher team leaders and all of the ushers to make sure any other needs that came up, we had somebody volunteer there to go help meet those. One of the most rewarding experiences of my life, all three of those, both from a sense of accomplishment that, hey, we did it, pure exhaustion at the end of the weekend, but then just some of the little personal stories that you see happening around you. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to go into a great detail on this, but probably one of the craziest things I ever saw was at one point they had a prayer team up front, just if anybody wants to come up. And one of the gentlemen up there, he met for the first time in a number of years his brother, who was actually in prison, and they had a number of prisoners that came and helped do the setup and tear down of all the chairs. And his brother came up there, and he looks up, and wow, it's my brother I haven't seen forever, which was really neat.
That is pretty cool. That is pretty cool. I was involved. I used to work with hospitality. I worked in what they call the SMRF area, which was social, military, education, religious, fraternal. I think that's what the acronym was. So that's how I became familiar with.
So
that,
like setting up the hotel, the room
setting
blocks.
Up the room blocks. Yeah, we would go in and set up room blocks, and if there were any kind of on that one conference, I remember there were a few. There weren't too many because most of it took place in the Astro domain.
Right.
But there were a few meetings and things of that nature. We'd book out some meeting space and stuff like that. Did a little bit of catering, but it was primarily a room block. Yeah, no, that and it was a really it was in the summer, right?
Late summer, yeah.
Late summer, so it was a perfect time. Mm-hmm. So when you're in the hotels, you're talking about average daily rate and monthly occupancies, and it was like there was a gap there, and you guys filled it. So it was like, yes, we celebrated our little victories in the Smurf area because we were not corporate, we were the weekend guys, you know? And so when we had stuff like that, we're like, yeah, see, we can contribute too. Yeah. So anyway, my experience was really nice with them too. I mean, the people that I met, it was really, really cool. They were good folks. So that's a nice little, for the people who are, again, watching and listening, just a little bit of insight, kind of where your background comes from. I know you talk a lot on your website about your youth sports. I know you've done basketball for the girls, you've refereed softball, baseball, volleyball. So, you get a sense that, I think, who was it? Annette said the other day, I think she said, we're serial volunteers. You get a sense that maybe that's true of you too.
I'm going to steal that. That's great. Thanks, Annette. No, it's we had a great upbringing. Mm-hmm. I mean, small town upbringing. At times, it seemed very boring.
Right.
What 15-year-old kid wants his mom to know what he did before he gets home?
Right.
But at the same time, it'd be a great place to raise my kids now.
Sure.
But one of the things that was always kind of put back into us was you've got to give back in some way. I mean, there was that movie Pay It Forward, but long before that, it was do what you can. So. Volunteer was a big part of our life. Myself, more as I get older, obviously.
All right.
My mother volunteered quite a bit. My sister does now. So that's just something that was pushed into us and that we've adopted. Right. So you look for opportunities.
Sure. I think it's for me personally, I think it's one of the best things you can do with your time. When we moved to the Leander area, I made the personal choice to get involved. Mm-hmm. I was like, because I did volunteer stuff in Houston and in Cyprus, but it was just such a small microcosm of what was going on all around. Here, I felt an opportunity to get a little bit more involved and become a little bit more, I don't want to say impactful, with some of the volunteer initiatives. Yeah, and I feel like I've made a little bit of a difference out here. It's been few short 3 years, but it's nice to kind of know that you're contributing to your community.
Right.
And with Leander, and I know you talk about it a little bit, again, I think I read this on your website, you talk about the rapid growth and things of that nature, and trying to hang on to some sense of community, and I think that's a great way to be able to do that.
Yes.
Especially when there's communication of that, like people
Mm-hmm.
understand what it is that you're doing. We're still small enough. I think we will always be small enough of a city, of a concern, that people can be familiar with that and know what's going on with all the various leagues and the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts and all that kind of stuff. Speaking of Boy Scouts,
Yeah.
you're an Eagle Scout.
I
Right?
am. Nice segue, by the way.
Yeah, well, hey, I'm a pro.
All right.
Yeah, no, I found that interesting too, because it's actually come up in a couple of the interviews that I've done. Mostly, we've talked about Girl Scouts, but I always reference Eagle Scouts because we were kind of trying to juxtapose in people's minds, because they're a little less familiar with some of the service awards in the Girl Scouts. People were familiar with being an Eagle Scout.
Right.
I think people know what that is. So I was always trying to kind of juxtapose the gold and silver, bronze service awards in Girl Scouts with the Eagle Scouts. I'm also fond of saying I've had no interest in being an Eagle Scout. It's a lot of work.
It is.
It's a lot of work. I went Boy Scouts, I went Cub Scouts, Webelos, and then I stopped. So there you go. We have that in common. We did at least that much together.
Well, and I'll be the first to admit there was a 6-month period where I just stalled out somewhere around second class.
Right.
That I'm like, I just don't have the energy or time to do this, but fortunately I found it again.
No, I think it's a great accomplishment. I've met several Eagle Scouts through my life and in volunteering and all sorts of things, and I always find the character of the people who pursue that to be really a really good character. I mean, obviously that's what they're teaching you when they're talking about. You're learning about community and character and service and things of that nature.
And just traits that make you a better person.
Yeah, anything particular that you take from Eagle Scouts on a day-to-day? Just, it's not something that you put on the uniform every afternoon, I'm sure.
No, it's not. But, my scoutmaster, who is a friend of mine now, he was also my high school guidance counselor, and he lived about 4 or 5 houses down.
Of course,
so,
this was in this small town, right?
Yeah, where else were you going to live,
right?
But, yeah, so one of the things he had us do, we had this coin that just... The only thing I remember about it is it said do a good turn daily. And you'd carry it in a pocket, and once you did a good turn for someone, you move it to the other pocket.
Oh, interesting.
Still don't carry that coin, but I still think about that a lot.
Cool.
And
that's cool.
Still, I'm the guy that returns the shopping cart to the bin.
Guilty.
I
do the same thing. And it's funny because, I get a little irritated, and maybe you do too. We're human, but it drives me crazy when people don't. And what drives me even, I'm less bothered by the people who just leave it anywhere than the people who take it all the way up to the cart area and leave it like on the curb, like they don't push it in.
Right.
That drives me nuts. I'm like, what? You were right here.
Well, and that's funny because kids are going to kill me on this, but that's one of the things I keep trying to push them is finish the job.
Yeah. No, it's true. I always say my favorite is it takes twice as long to do it wrong.
Yeah.
Because you got to come back and do it again.
That's much better than the thing I say.
Well, it's a family show.
Right.
So anyway. Okay, so work life. What is your occupation? What do you do for a living?
I'm in software.
Oh, okay.
So I work for a company headquartered out of San Antonio, although we gave up our lease because everybody's remote.
Right.
I've been working remote for 20 plus years. If I'm not traveling to a client, which I used to do frequently, I work out of the house. So not a big change there. But yeah, we're a software company. We sell facilities management software primarily to public sector, higher education. This past year we broke off and started a group focused on state and local government.
Okay.
And it's all facilities management, the things that make the place go.
Right. So with facilities management, you're talking about boilers and AC units and things of that
We're talking about work orders, preventive maintenance, keys, capital planning.
Gotcha.
Right.
Gotcha.
Back office things.
Okay. How big is your company?
The company is, 50 to 100 people.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll just
fairly
say in that
decent
range.
size.
Yeah. Now the group that we just broke off is just under a dozen to start. It's essentially, I liken it to a startup with an established product that we're changing.
Yeah. No, familiar with that too. I'm in the startup arena now here in Austin, and I work for SAS providers in Houston for 12 some odd years.
Yeah.
You know, so and been remote, and I've been remote not 20 years, but about 7 years now.
And
So.
it's weird saying that a company is almost a startup when you've been around 30 years.
Yeah. But in software, that's totally not unusual.
Right.
I mean, that happens all the time. And you spin off or you take an idea, and you know, if you have the IP and you start your own company, I mean, it happens a lot.
Right.
In here in Austin, it's crazy. It's crazy how many startups there are out here. When I first got here, I was interested in finding out a little bit more. The opportunity presented itself, and that's all I've been doing for the past couple of years. You know, it's just like, it's kind of fun. It's frustrating, but it's fun. You never know what to expect day to day.
Yeah, it's really a gamble. You do your homework, but what?
Yeah, it
one
is a
out
gamble.
of how many?
Absolutely. You know, I mean, some people will go to Vegas.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll do a startup. Same thing.
Yeah. You save the airfare.
Right. Exactly. That, and you can talk about what you did. It doesn't stay in Vegas.
That's true.
Anyway. Okay. Good. Well, that kind of gives people a little bit of insight as to where you're coming from. What kind of business exposure you have on a daily basis, and like I said, with these interviews, I really kind of try to draw out a little bit more of who you are, what kind of, your personality and what you do for a living. Helps people kind of understand who the candidate is, because it flavors the next question, which is, why are you running? What prompted you to throw your hat in the ring?
Well, I already mentioned that it was instilled in us to give back, and you're always looking for ways, sometimes passively. So a year and a half ago, maybe, my wife and I were just talking and joking, and I don't even remember what it was about at this point, but we're kind of griping about something. I'm like, I'm just going to go run for city council and fix this. And we laughed. And then last fall, the opportunity came up for the seat that was resigned.
Yeah.
So I ran for that.
Yep.
Annette won that, and quite honestly, she was the most qualified candidate for it. But that really got me interested, and like, okay, I'm going to do this next spring. So here we are.
Yeah. No, it was interesting because I did, again, as I was spending a little bit of time, learning a little bit about you so we could have this conversation today, and I looked on your website. You do go in, I like your blog, I like what you're doing there, and I think that's a good way of letting people understand your view on some of the issues. I also know that you pivoted a little bit in your blog due to what happened just a couple of weeks ago, which is crazy when you think about it, because we're sitting here right now, and it's I don't know,
that's
75 degrees outside or something like that. And just over a week ago, there's no way we could have done that. Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah,
that's just crazy. So those types of topics are obviously something that I think you're interested in. I think you mentioned infrastructure and a couple of other things on your website, and I of course invite all viewers to visit his website. We're going to have Steve talk a little bit about his social media presence towards the end of the interview, but definitely go and see what it is that he's talking about. I don't like to do too much of a deep dive here, but I will ask you one question because I think it's fair, and I asked Annette the same question.
Okay.
Obviously you're coming from a little bit different perspective than she was because she's already on council. But as it relates to that whole issue with the water, how much have you educated yourself to that issue now, and what are your initial thoughts? Because I'm not going to assume you know everything.
I would never proclaim to know everything about it. In fact, I learn more and more about the history of this issue on almost a daily basis. Whether it's talking to current council and the mayor, talking to my neighbors, reading on Facebook, many of the opinions are very well educated. Some of them are not so well educated and angry. And I want to try to stay out of the anger and the emotion of it and just look at the facts that are involved here.
Right.
The bottom line is the city needs to grow responsibly. We're growing at a meteoric rate, and council needs to look ahead. And I think this council is doing a pretty good job of that. I think a lot of what we're running into with the water issues were from decisions made by previous council. It's not like you can make a decision in last July or August and it's already in place now, especially talking infrastructure.
Sure.
It takes longer than that to do engineering, let alone the funding, the permitting, everything. We're talking years. So right now we are experiencing the infrastructure that was put into place years ago by a group that had no clue that we would grow from 20,000 to 75,000 in a 5-year period.
Right.
So that's a big part of what we're running into on this water issue, as well as our roads issue. There's infrastructure there that Some of our roads are woefully undersized for certain times of day.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what the important takeaway from this is, as we're looking at planning and zoning issues, we've got to look at what Leander could be 5 years from now, 10 years ago, not what it is now.
Yep. No, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think, my experience and my public comment, and I've commented on this in public before, we do not need to concern ourselves with Leander's issues in a 3-5 year plan. We need to concern ourselves with Leander's issues in a 10, 15, and 20-year plan.
Right.
The interview that I did with Alex Tyneman, where he's already started on the North Line project, which is a huge, huge boost to what's going to happen in Leander. He's 10, 15 years away from having that completely realized.
Right.
Which, you think about it, and the conversations that take place a lot of times, I don't think take that into account.
I think you need to have that visionary slant to the personality to be able to do what he's doing effectively, what the decisions council makes effectively. You've got to be able to look past what I can see right now.
Yep. No, I think that's fair. And I think your comments there are well thought out. And I'm sure as you educate yourself more on the particulars of that issue, because it's a very complex issue,
right?
Which I've stated before, it's not a simple thing to understand. But I think that there's a lot of good ideas, and there's a lot of good people who are looking at that now. There's plenty of blame to go around. There is plenty of blame to go around, and we could spend all day talking about that.
Right.
I don't want to do that. I think it's important to say, okay, we know what happened. Well, how do we do to prevent that from happening again? How do we plan for similar issues? On the other side of that coin, it was frozen. What do we do when it's 140 outside?
Right.
Well, how do we manage those
I think that Snowpocalypse has also made some of those issues slam dunks now.
Oh, sure. No, and it's
we need a backup.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that also goes, again, I don't want to get too deep into topics and the conversations as it relates to policy, because that's not really what I want to try to do here. But we'll chat a little bit about that, because I think it is important to understand that a lot of times these issues are framed in such a way that it becomes the idea of fixing it or planning for a fix becomes a negative in the sense that it costs too much. And I just look at that and I say, you know what, at the end of the day, and you don't have to agree with this, but I think at the end of the day, look, whatever it costs us today is going to be far less than what it costs us 5 years from now.
I agree. At the topic of roads, okay, if we're going to expand or redo roads, as an example, or water supply, another example, we need to look at the future need, not the need now. Otherwise, we're going to go back and do it again and again and again and spend a ton more than we would if we just future size.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that's a good outlook. Definitely a good way to take a look at that. Okay, so I'm going to flip the script a little bit here. I noted one of the other things that you talked about was this Twister record.
Yes.
Which I thought was kind of hilarious. But so in college, right?
Right.
You guys did you were briefly, I don't know what that means, but you were the world record holders for Twister, right? A game of Twister?
Yeah, so at my college, Miami University, Oxford, Ohio.
Of Ohio?
Yes.
Familiar with that.
Oh.
Phi Kappa Tau, that's the headquarters of my fraternity.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
So every one of the fraternities, team with a sorority or on their own, would do a philanthropy every year. So one year we decided ours was going to be, let's play Twister. By the time it was done, it was a weekend-long festival. Twister sent us hundreds of game boards.
Wow.
We had them duct taped down across the parking lot at the stadium.
That's very cool.
And loudspeaker, and it was just an elimination tournament till it got down to a winner.
Okay, so you get to, you're kind of, that's what I wanted to know. Who won?
Actually, a fellow who ended up pledging our fraternity that year.
That's hilarious. So what frat was it?
Delta Chi.
Delta Chi? Okay,
Yep.
Delta Chi. All right, we didn't have Delta Chi down south, but I remember seeing them when I was up. I went to a national conference at Miami, Ohio.
Oh, okay.
For Phi Tau.
Okay.
So, yeah, that was cool. They thought I was from New York, but I was from Texas. I never could figure that one out.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. It was
I
the
don't
way
see
I
it.
dressed. I have no idea. Anyway, that's kind of cool. I was always curious, like, who won?
Yeah.
Because that would be the first thing that I would ask. Who won? Anyway, all right. So I appreciate your time today. I want to let people know where they can find you. So what are your plans for your campaign? I mean, obviously we're still in the middle of the pandemic, so it does make it very difficult to go door to door and knock on people's doors. Now, what are your solutions there, and where else can people maybe find you and sit and chat?
Okay, so some of my supporters are Leander business owners, and some of them are restaurants. So I've got a couple of Meet the Candidates coming up at some of those places. Also working with a number of HOA groups to get out either, if not to their meetings, but potentially out to meet with their people and have them help advertise it. So upcoming, we're trying to get a date to have a Meet the Candidate outside at the pavilions at Lakewood Park.
Okay.
That's probably the most pressing one.
Sure.
In fact, one of my supporters, who's also on the Parks and Rec Advisory Board with me, is working on that as we speak.
Okay.
So hopefully within the next few weeks we'll have that.
Good.
But you can check my website because there is a page of events. So it's going to list all of these upcoming opportunities. And outside of that, I'm very open. Just contact me there. You can hit my social media there. You can email me on the webpage. Love to meet people, love to talk to people. I'm not overly shy.
Yeah, I can attest to
Yeah,
that.
okay.
This was really easy.
Oh, good. We're going to, be out and about, and I'm out and about quite a bit. Some in Cedar Park, some in Leander. If you see me, the guy in a Hawaiian shirt most of the time, come up and talk to me. So the website is haynesforleander.com, all one word, and for is spelled out, F-O-R. So www.haynesforleander.com, and Haynes is H-A-N-E-S. And then from there, you can hit all my social media, my Twitter, my Instagram, my Facebook. You can email me. And for that matter, you can request yard signs. We'll bring them out to you free of charge. You can see, as I said, upcoming events. You can keep up with the blog and just see what we believe in. So believe in Steve.
Nice plug, Steve.
Shameless, I know.
Shameless indeed. But hey, it's politics. I appreciate your time. This has been fabulous. I hope that this has helped the folks out in Leander get a little bit of better sense of who Steve Haynes is. And I invite you, of course, I'm working on a candidate forum myself that'll take place in April.
Yep.
So hopefully, keeping our fingers crossed on that one. Got to do some logistics, but I certainly hope you'll participate at that point in time, and we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive at that point.
Okay,
we'll
great.
kind of get into more of the topics and talk about leaderships and styles and things of that nature. This is really more about getting people to know who you are.
That's great.
So,
I appreciate it. I
that.
appreciate the opportunity, and please, anything you need. I'm very in favor of anything Leander, and I like what you're doing with this. I've watched most of your previous editions.
Great.
And I want to see where this goes.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate that as well. Thank you for that support. On that note, we'll go ahead and wrap up the interview here with Steve here on Lean in Leander. Let me remind folks that you can go to voteinleander.com. On Vote in Leander, I'm supporting an opportunity there for you to understand what the basic dates are for all this election process, early registration, the early voting dates, etc. And there's also now a registration site in the site itself. So you can register online. Make it very, very easy for you to get registered to vote. It's super, super important. I'm going to hammer on this on these episodes, the ones that are related to Vote in Leander. Leander is closing in on 70,000 people, and only 3.5% of the population votes right now. That's not good enough. I don't care which side of the aisle you're on, which flag you might salute. It doesn't matter. If you've only got 3.5% of the population voting in a city of 70,000 people, that's not a good enough cross section of the community. And if we're going to grow as quickly as we're going to grow, we need your voices to be part of that. So I encourage you to vote. Steve, thank you for your time.
Thank you. And May 1st, don't forget.
May 1st. We'll see you next time on Lean in Leander.